Welcome back to the FunSpan podcast. I am Jack Mislinski. I'm an ultra athlete, physiology grad student, and an endurance and health coach. So last week we covered the training curve and our three variables of endurance training. They are metabolic efficiency, economy, and fatigue resistance. And I highly recommend you go back and check that out if you want to dive deep into the science of training theory. But this week we're going to be looking at how do we use all of that backbone and that understanding of adaptation to build a plan that actually works for us? Because in practice, what matters is not any one magic workout. It's the hierarchy of stimuli and adaptation across your week, how the pieces fit together, incorporating recovery and different sessions to adapt you toward your ultimate goal. So let's start with the number one biggest gravitational pull variable in a training week, and that is your total volume. Across almost every endurance sport, if you look at elites, especially in running, there was a recent study published correlating the highest weekly mileages with the best performances in elites. But even in cyclists, swimmers, and skiers, the single strongest predictor of performance is weekly volume. That's how many miles or hours you're logging week after week, season after season. And the reason that this works is not rocket science. Our bodies are adaptation machines that respond to time under stress. That means that the more that we subject it to, the more that we have the potential to recover from it. And notice that I said potential because that doesn't always mean that more is always better. There are injury limits, lifestyle limits. Obviously, so many of us only have so many hours in the week, and there are genetic limits as well. But when you zoom out, the people who perform the best have spent the most amount of time training aerobically over the longest period of time, giving their body the chance to adapt. And that's why when you see world-class athletes like Christian Blumenfeld or Eliud Kipchoge, and you're looking at their miles per week, they're getting up there. And we see that again in the study, but it doesn't only affect your performance. If your main goal is health, volume is also going to be the single biggest thing to switch on to improve your VO2 max, your insulin sensitivity, increase capillary density, and enhance your mitochondrial both quantity and quality. It also remodels the heart to be bigger, stronger, and more efficient. Endurance training, specifically the amount of time that you put into endurance training, is going to be your biggest way to change your stroke volume, which is the amount of blood that we're able to move through our body per beat, which is going to lower your resting heart rate and increase your energy efficiency. So you can think of weekly volume as the foundation. It's a number that we're looking at to ask ourselves, how much did I stress my cardiorespiratory system and how much work did I accumulate throughout that? Because if nothing else throughout your week changes, not your shoes, not your gadgets, but your volume grows sustainably and slowly, you will almost certainly get better, both in performance and in health. So when it comes to putting a week together, obviously, yes, injury prevention is super important. And recovery, again, as I mentioned last episode, is the lens through which we can look at engineering a week. But our weekly mileage is going to be a main target that we're going to continue to look at and make sure that we're progressing sustainably. Right underneath that and kind of leading into it is the long session. Obviously, for runners, you're used to it. That's the long run. But of course, cyclists, swimmers, there's an equivalent across every sport. And for some of you, it might be a long hike or a long Nordic ski day. But the long session is the most potent workout of the week because it's hitting all three variables at once. Just like last week, we talked about how different workouts accomplish different physiological goals. A long session is going to hit a lot of them all at once. It gives you a long time in steady state without spiking your lactate too much, increasing your monocarboxylate transporter quantity. It's going to increase your economy because you're rehearsing these movement patterns under light fatigue. And with fatigue resistance, you're keeping your form together as glycogen and freshness drop. So if volume is the total budget, the long session is your biggest line item and something that we're going to engineer the rest of the week around. Physiologically, that long session increases mitochondrial signaling. It's going to strengthen your type 1 fibers or your oxidative muscle fibers, again, to use lactate as fuel. It's going to improve your fat and glucose metabolism under aerobic conditions, and that leads into fueling and the importance of that, which we can talk about later. And it's just building tissue resilience as well through time on feet at a relatively low intensity. It also teaches your nervous system we can go for a while. This is just kind of what we do. And when it comes to endurance events, obviously that's important. And psychologically, builds confidence. It teaches you that discomfort isn't danger and that you can perform through all of that. So the simplest week building questions to start with are, how much total volume can I sustainably handle and build upon right now? And where does my long session go as the anchor? So once those two are in place, the weekly volume target and the long session, we can move to the next piece of the hierarchy. And these are your quality work sessions. Quality work for our purposes is threshold and interval training. It's time spent above your normal aerobic cruising pace, above your so-called zone 2, where it's going to start to impact your recovery, but still under your full red line. And this is where your curve starts to come alive and get a little bit unique. Remember, once your zone 2 power has plateaued for your current stimulus, you have to train further out the curve to keep improving your metabolic efficiency and adapt to certain demands of either your race goals or health goals. And threshold work, depending on your goal again, does exactly that. It's hard enough to improve your lactate clearance and utilization, increase stroke volume at higher outputs, and push mitochondrial enzymes to adapt, but not so hard that you're just doing survival sprints and it's going to affect the rest of your week down the line. And when it comes to intervals, a lot of people, again, have fancy magic workout constructions, whether it's a fartlek or whatever, but intervals are simply the delivery system that lets you accumulate meaningful time at intensity. Because this is really important. Your body adapts to the cumulative quality work, not the average intensity on Strava. So bear with me through a thought experiment. If you're pushing at like a 5K pace for 20 minutes outside, and you go as long as you can until you fail, you're going to be wiped for the rest of your workout, and the total amount of time that you accumulate at higher intensities will be just that. On the other hand, you could conceivably construct a workout where you're doing faster than a 5K pace in intervals of 4 or 5 minutes and do 5 or 6 of those so that you end up getting 30 plus minutes at that intensity or harder, and your body's going to adapt better to that. And this is where it's important to separate the ego, because if you go all out for 40 minutes and blast an all out rep and then jog and then sprint, the average might look impressive, but it doesn't tell you what adaptation you earned for your body. And quality work isn't just about being hard, it's also about being repeatable. If you do one threshold session that absolutely buries you for 4 days, you didn't do a great threshold session. You just did a stress grenade for your week's workout structures. The best quality is the kind that you can return to next week and build upon. It's targeted, repeatable stimuli that compounds. Right underneath threshold and intervals, we have economy work, and that's strides or short speed work. I often prescribe these to athletes as 20 to 30 seconds relaxed, but springy and fast with full recovery. It's not a full out sprint, but it's fast running for sure. And the goal is not to wreck yourself, it's just to sharpen neuromuscular coordination, improve tendon stiffness, and practice turnover at higher speeds. Because whether you believe it or not, whether it's running, cycling, or another sport, if you want to achieve faster paces, you have to try going below them. These economy targeted strides recruit fast twitch fibers without a huge metabolic cost. So you can tack them onto a zone 2 session without paying the recovery tax. And over months and years, this will improve your form, your pop, and your ability to change gears. Of course, this is mainly running specific, but translates to other sports as well. So now our weekly hierarchy looks like volume is number 1, then long session as the anchor and the main lead in to your total accumulated volume or mileage. Then quality work to raise the ceiling through thresholds and intervals and shape your training curve how you want to adapt it. And then economy work to keep the system efficient. And this brings us finally all the way down here to zone two. Of course, zone two had its moment. And if you're on fitness Twitter, you've been told that zone two is some kind of holy grail and answer to everything. And honestly, in the beginning of all of this, the zone two hype is what got me into physiology in the first place. I found it super interesting. And to be fair, it's not wrong. It's just incomplete, especially once you've passed beginner gains, because zone two is a foundational tool. It improves metabolic health, it's gentle on your joints, it builds mitochondria, and it lets you accumulate a ton of volume. Because theoretically, you can just stack the miles at this intensity without ever really hitting a wall where you are unable to recover from it. Zone 2 is what got me into the game of running. It's what made me realize that runner's high is a real thing, and it made me realize that you don't need to go all out to enjoy it. But the mistake is when people start to treat zone 2 like it's a strategy in and of itself, when really it is one single substrate and a part of a cocktail throughout training theory that we can incorporate to accomplish a specific function, but it's not something to center your entire training block around. The issue isn't that zone 2 is bad, the issue is that it got presented as sufficient, but really just do zone 2 forever starts to hit a plateau, as we've discussed before. For someone who's untrained or mildly trained, zone 2 can be overload. Yes, their system isn't adapted yet, especially at that lower end of the training curve. So the curve can shift up dramatically and meaningfully across the entire thing. But for someone who's already decently fit, there comes a point where adding another hour of zone 2 doesn't move the needle much on metabolic efficiency as much as a harder, more quality session could do, because you're sitting on a flatter part of a curve. But zone 2 is crucial. It is the connective tissue between big stimuli and key sessions. But if you're already fit, zone 2 alone won't keep raising your ceiling forever. So strategically, it becomes the supporting actor and not the hero in and of itself. It becomes the work that we can stack between quality sessions to almost no end, again, to increase our total accumulated volume without damaging recovery. How do you know if you've plateaued on a zone 2 only curve? Through self-diagnosis. And this is the part that helps apply some of this training theory to your own life, and for me was especially relevant just 6 months ago when I got off the PCT, because zone 2 can continue to improve your metabolic efficiency, your running economy, and your fatigue resistance when you're improving your pace at the same effort over weeks. Your long runs feel smoother at the same effort. Your recovery is improving even as you stack volume. That's super important. And your threshold sessions feel more controlled. And again, you're gaining pace there as well. But you definitely need more focus around quality sessions if you're adding volume, but your pace isn't improving. When it comes to easy and threshold or 5K or marathon or faster paces, they're not improving over time. You feel trained, but not fitter. You're accumulating fatigue without a clear performance shift. And to be clear, being on a plateau doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing something wrong. It just takes more focused attention on other parts of this training theory. It just means that the next adaptation requires a slightly different stimulus, usually pushing further out the curve in a more strategic way that you can recover from and adapt to, changing the profile of your training curve and improving your performance at higher intensities. That's the whole game. So now we have the whole hierarchy, volume as the foundation behind it all, that everything else subtly leads into and is kind of the best predictor of your performance. Then there's the long session as the anchor and biggest contributor to that volume. Threshold and interval work to raise the ceiling and shape your fitness curve as intensity goes up and to gain race-specific function. Strides to sharpen your economy, and zone 2 and easy work to fill in the gaps and contribute to your total volume without wrecking your recovery. So the next question is, how much can you actually handle without blowing up? And what should your target weekly mileage be to start? And this is where recovery and load management come in and matter a ton. Your body doesn't adapt during training or during the stimulus itself. It adapts between sessions when you give it rest and fuel. The limiting factor over 6 months is almost never, I didn't nail the perfect interval workout on January 16th. It's usually, I didn't recover from what I tried to do. I got hurt. Life stress made me more inconsistent. I missed workouts over a longer period of time. So, how do we think about recovery in a sustainable way that can guide our decisions about what to do next? First, monitor it very simply. I like a few subjective signals, like how do you feel when you're warming up? Are you dreading sessions you normally enjoy? Because subconsciously, our body can be signaling to us that we need more time to adapt or a slight shift of focus within our training engineering. Another great tool is heart rate at a known effort. If your easy loop is suddenly 10 beats per minute higher, that's a signal that you should listen to. Coordination. Do you feel snappy when you run at faster paces, or do you feel like you're dragging yourself along? And then mood and motivation, because irritability and apathy are real training signals. Another great one that I like to track is your resting heart rate over time. And again, we're not looking at any one specific night because we've all had those days or those poor night's sleep. But over time, is your resting heart rate trending upwards, signaling that you might need to take a step back and reassess, or is it trending downwards, signaling again that you're growing that stroke volume, you're getting more aerobically efficient and adapting well. Once you get a feel for recovery through these few variables, you can improve your recovery with, you guessed it, the very boring basics that you've heard everywhere else. Number one, the thing is sleep enough and sleep consistently. Go to bed at a normal time and get 8 to 9 hours of sleep, especially if you're building mileage and accumulating more and more volume. Fuel enough, especially after hard days, but also during easy runs or easy sessions. You need to hydrate, get your electrolytes in if you're sweating a ton, and most importantly, get your carbs in before and after working out with protein to signal muscle protein synthesis. Another great recovery tactic is to keep low-level movement throughout your day. Use an easy aerobic, very slow run or ride to flush out metabolites from the affected or sore areas. And believe it or not, time on feet can be a magnificent tool to recover better and signal for tissue buildup and injury prevention. I learned on the PCT that super long days on my feet, 12 to 14 hours a day, could be adapted to. And my body ended up building up my small muscles and tendons to a point where they kind of felt bulletproof. And as I first got back into running, I didn't have an overuse injury for 6 months after getting off the trail. So even if you're recovering poorly, don't be afraid to get time on your feet, do a long walk or hike, get time in zone 1 and zone 2 as your body adapts. Another important recovery tool that I think is massively underrated is that your nervous system needs an off ramp. A lot of people think that recovery is just what happens when you sleep, that your resting heart rate can drift down in the early part of the night, but that's not necessarily true. Your sleep quality is largely set by what your body thinks your demand is in the last hour of your day. So if your pre-bed heart rate is still elevated, whether it's from training late, from stimulants like caffeine too late in the day, or stress, or yes, LED screens and the blue light on your iPhone late at night, your body might not get the chance to receive the signal to downshift. And that can show up the next day as feeling under-recovered and weirdly flat despite not necessarily doing anything wrong. So sometimes the highest return recovery move is not any one supplement or anything like that. Although, side note, I do love magnesium for bed. I use it 30 to 60 minutes before I fall asleep, and that can assist to upregulate GABA and actually promote the release of melatonin. But the even bigger thing is just a 10 to 20 minute downshift or more if you have time. A slow walk, a warm shower, legs up, light stretching, a breathing exercise. One that I've been loving recently is the 4-7-8, because if we extend our exhale, that actually triggers our vagus nerve and signals to our body to slow down your heart rate and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And then with the warm shower, it's actually kind of counterintuitive, but when you take a warm shower, the blood comes to the surface capillaries on your skin so that when you get out, that heat radiates off and your body temperature drops by a couple of degrees, which is actually necessary to fall asleep. All of these tactics are super useful for me, but really it's about anything that tells the system that the threat or stimulus for the day is over. And on the training side of recovery, active recovery works best when it's truly easy and correctly timed. A short zone 1 session can definitely flush out metabolites later in the day or the next morning especially, and it can reduce soreness, number one, but definitely restore a little bit of rhythm without completely zonking out. Just don't push any recovery runs into zone 2 or above when you're already cooked, because that can just add another bill to the end of your recovery account. Lastly, it's important to build the week through the lens of recovery rather than ego. So instead of how many cool workouts can I cram into this week, how many miles can I aspire to, think more about what the minimum effective dose is of high quality stimuli that you can recover from consistently and adapt to sustainably progress. Sometimes, whether it's with life events or other commitments, that can mean taking a deloading week and actually dropping your weekly mileage if you've been continuing to progress. That's something that happened recently for me. I had an all-time high of 70 miles per week running, and I'm taking this week, because I'm getting a little hip aggravation, to lower the mileage a little bit, maybe to 50, and absorb the stimulus that I gave it last week. Going back to engineering a full week for most non-pro athletes, a week structure might look like one meaningful long session, then 1 or 2 quality sessions per week, a threshold or an interval workout, and then 1 or 2 small economy exposures through strides at the end of easy days throughout the week as well. And then you can fill in easy volume that keeps you happy and motivated as much as you want to contribute to your total weekly mileage, and you won't tax your recovery too much. Everything else, whether it's ketones, whether it's beetroot juice, all the other stuff that you're seeing on Instagram that gets the clicks on articles, should be supplementary to these main training theory cornerstones. Next, we get into periodization so that our training continues to support our growth over weeks and over months, not just days. Because even if you never race, periodization matters, because your body doesn't respond forever to the same signal, as we can see through the zone 2 conversation. But not only that, it can get boring, your tissues can lag, your motivation dips. So periodization doesn't have to mean spreadsheets or engineering training blocks around a race. It can just mean rotating your emphasis every 4 to 8 weeks while keeping that main hierarchy that we've talked about intact. But to go through the simple version, especially as it relates to race performance, there's the base phase that most people have talked about, where you're building volume and your long session while adding strides on the end of easy runs. Then there's the build phase, where you're keeping your volume steady and starting to add more threshold and quality work, leading into the race specific phase, where your long runs and your quality sessions are much more race like, allowing your body to fine tune its adaptation and be ready for race day. And of course, everyone has heard of the taper, where you're reducing volume and, most importantly, keeping a touch of intensity so that you're keeping your neuromuscular connections sharp and feeling confident arriving fresh to that race. But if you don't have a race, again, you can still cycle emphasis, maybe 6 weeks spent building an aerobic base and durability, especially if you're new to a certain sport. 4 weeks leaning into threshold progress or sharpening your VO2 max area of your curve. Maybe a deload week or 2 to consolidate some of the same tools and allow your body time to adapt. These are all just different dials to accomplish whatever your personal goal is. But when you rotate emphasis, you continue to adapt without needing to consistently do more and you stay trainable. And one area where that's super important for me personally is in deloading, because some weeks, like this week, where I'm adding a lot of stimulus and my tissues start to lag behind my cardiovascular capabilities, I can focus more on uphill treadmill or on lower impact work or on cycling to allow consolidation of what I've been stimulating. Of course, there are other supporting levers that we haven't discussed, including strength training, hill work, durability work, and sometimes even heat adaptation or heat therapy. But the mistake is treating any one of those as the foundation, because they're viewed mainly as constraint removers. For example, in the context of endurance or longevity, strength training isn't about becoming a power lifter or an Olympic deadlifter. It's about keeping tissues ahead of the cardio that you throw at it. Because if your engine is improving faster than your tendons, your connective tissue, your small muscles, you don't necessarily need more fitness, you need more durability. That's actually the stage where I'm at right now, I feel like. And when it comes to strength, the most important thing is that it's consistent and repeatable, because doing just, say, 25 step ups on each leg per day will do a lot more for you than one quality lifting session a week where you're doing deadlifts and you're doing squats, but then you drop off and forget about it for a while. Isometric work is another example that's been hugely important for me in remodeling my tendons, because I've had a history of huge overuse injuries, whether it's my IT band or patellofemoral pain or hip tendinosis. All of these things are just highlighting weaknesses elsewhere in muscle that we can train and adapt quickly so that we're not sidelined for too long. And I'll get into that in another episode. As I touched on just briefly, I absolutely love uphill treadmill because it gives you that aerobic stress without huge eccentric pounding. It's a way to add load and protect your tissues while you continue to stimulate your aerobic system. So to pull this all together, your body doesn't adapt to your intentions necessarily. And this is why it's super important to be very clear about what your goal is. It adapts to the stimulus that you actually give it. So if your outcome is to run a fast marathon and stay healthy, your stimulus has to line up with that, which means building metabolic efficiency, improving your economy, increasing your fatigue resistance. If your outcome, on the other hand, is hike 20 miles with my kids at 55, your tools are very similar and the dials are just tuned a little bit differently. In both cases, the same fundamental hierarchy holds: volume, a weekly long session as the anchor, threshold and interval work to raise your ceiling and hone specificity around your specific demands, and strides to keep you efficient and reactive and progressing on the economy side. Easy work is the connective tissue behind it all that builds mileage, and recovery is the governor that lets all of this repeat. If you remember only one thing from this episode, let it be this: training, when it comes to endurance, is about context. The same workout can be an absolute breakthrough for one person and just maintenance for another person. Your job is to put a microscope on what your actual goals are and build that context thoughtfully using the tools that we've discussed. Be crystal clear about what your intended outcome is, and then choose stimuli strategically that point to that. Respect recovery enough to repeat that week after week and adjust as you go. Because at the end of the day, the real win is not just a race PR. It's a version of you 5, 10, 20 years down the line who still has a huge aerobic engine, still loves training, still has resilient tissues, and a playful relationship with type 2 fun. I want to continue to have a calendar full of events that I'm excited to train for, and sustainability is the framework behind all of that that makes that possible. And that, in a nutshell, is endurance training with a FunSpan frame. It's about fulfillment over any one finish line, but with training that's smart enough that you often get both on the performance side and the longevity side. And all of this training stress runs on fuel. So next episode, we're going to be talking nutrition, not meal plans, not macros, not math equations that you'll have to take home, but how macronutrients are misunderstood and debated about online, but can actually be engineered to support our three variables of endurance training. We'll talk about training fasted versus fueled, some common misconceptions, why carbs have been in the news a lot recently, and how fats and oils are misconstrued very often and debated about, whether it's seed oils or saturated fats, or we're putting our fries in beef tallow now. But mainly, it's about how to think about studies without getting manipulated by headlines, how to hone in on the science and think about it in a logical way that allows you to dissect anything. So, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep going.